Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to Creating the Conversation podcast, to episode 23. Guys, it has been a few weeks. Us guys have been chilling. We've been, well, what do you mean chilling? You know, I'm just blowing that one to tell you, mate. We've just been stuck in our home and doing nothing. You know what I'm saying? Nothing. It's just been mad, bro. You know what I'm saying? And this is just not right, man. You know, too much of this lockdown and all that going on, and people are stressing out. Hopefully for the 12th of April, we'll be chilling. Guys, thank you very much for joining us on Me and You Education, platforms on the YouTube as well as on Facebook. Guys, we have an awesome program today. And before I introduce our main guest, let me call upon my main man, Mr. Ivan Imran. How you doing, my man? What's happening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Look at that. Look at that introduction I give you, my man. And then you go, I'm good. How are you? How are you doing, my man? You know what I'm saying?
All right, I'll be honest. Well, as you know, I've literally just walked in the door from doing a support worker shift. So this is dedication. Straight in the door, cup of coffee, and straight on air with you, my brother.
Oh, my Lord. I love you.
I haven't even took my tag off yet, look.
Say it again, bro.
Oh,
you still get a tag on. Right.
Yeah.
And you came straight in. No, Ivan, I've got to give it to you, man. Your dedication is, man, yeah, your dedication is awesome. I know some of the work that you do as care and support for the community at this moment in time is huge, my man. I want to, Ivan, you're the man, I tell you. You're the man. You always pull out what we, to bring in these amazing guests of ours. And today's guest is an individual who's got, oh my God, what a history he's got, man. He's got history and half, man. Do you know what I'm saying? This guy lock, bottle, everything. I just off screen, off air. I said to him, I go to him, man, you deal with everything, don't you? You know what's going on? But amazing guy, Jesse Curtis Morton, a young gentleman who's been through some trials and tribulations in his life, who's been up and down. All right, in his existence, but today he's doing some amazing work in countering extremism of all types of extremism. But he's an individual who, let me put it like this, I've said it before about this as well, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, got his sign, and guess what? He bloody burnt the damn thing as well. That's what he done. And I'm gonna call upon my main man, madman. I'm gonna say it, madman, Jesse Curtis Morton. How are you, my man? How you doing? Welcome from all the way from Alexandria, Virginia, USA.
Indeed. Thank you for having me.
Ahlan wa sahlan, my bro.
Wa alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Ivan, good to see you. Thank you for having me. Good to meet with you, Imran. And this is great. How are you?
No worries, buddy.
We are happy to have you, my man.
Well.
And we're honored to have you. Do you know what I'm saying? Because
before us, for you.
Did you catch that?
I didn't hear. What did you say, Ivan?
How's America at the minute?
A little bit, let's say, torn up. Best way to describe it. Things are looking bleak, but we've been here before. We used to be controlled by you guys. So it was worse in the past. There you go.
Yes. You're controlled by you. I love that one. This is gonna be a good discussion, bro.
There we go.
Right,
Division and discord, cross Atlantic, indeed.
My man,
1812, wasn't it? Was it 1812?
1776. But yeah, you guys did us bad in 1812 too.
Oh.
That was later on. Yeah, indeed.
Oh my!
We know our history.
Never ever open old wounds. You don't know what you're gonna find in there, mate. You know what I mean? It's infested, bro.
It's true.
It's infested. You gotta be careful. Jesse, my man, gotta give you strength, man. Thank you for joining us today. I know you have much better weather than ours. All right. Even if I want to,
still daytime here.
So it's daytime there. Yeah, you're relaxing, you're chilling, you know what I mean? You're doing your thing. And us guys are here freezing like mad. You know what I'm saying?
And locked down too, I think. Yes.
Lockdown too, yeah.
Still?
Lockdown too.
Yeah.
You got no lockdown? What's going on with you guys?
We can move around, and from the beginning, it's been subject to personal choice for the most part. But that's why we have 500,000 dead.
We do, you do, and that's really sad. And may our prayers go out to all of those who have all the fatalities, all the people who are in hospital at this moment in time. I think this is why you need leaders who have a little bit of sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Hopefully, the man who's coming now, right, and hopefully he does what's needed for the country. He started to put things into place, which is brilliant. Better than the gentleman just before. Not much of a gentleman, but anyway, the person before. Hopefully our prayers are with you, our thoughts are with you on the other side of the pond, and hopefully things will start getting better at your end as well, my man.
Yeah.
Jesse, I want to bring you into a conversation and discussion. Of course, you are a gentleman who originates from New York, the city which is well known to us around the world because of the movies and etc. And of course, because of that particular atrocity that took place of the Twin Towers as well. I want to take you back to your young days, sir. I want to start our conversation from there. You are a young, strapping lad, right? Give me your background, sir. Tell us who you are, where you are from, and a little bit of your journey, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. For the fact of being originated from New York, that's actually my father's original place. And that's an important part of my story because my father grew up very wealthy, part of an affluent household. His father was an attorney. My descendants go all the way back to, I'm a direct descendant of John Adams, who was a founding father of the United States.
Oh, wow.
My father's side of the family came over on the Mayflower, sons and daughters of the American Revolution. So I would say that it's a very different side than my mother's side because my father in his senior year of high school experienced the death of his father out of nowhere from lung cancer.
Oh, wow.
Back then we didn't know smoking killed. And he had sort of a cognitive opening that we would call, opening for radicalization today. And he fell into the far leftist sort of counterculture of the era. And he went to study in college at a small town in Pennsylvania where he met my working class mother, who has very, very, very closed community, small town roots. And he met her at she was a waitress at a restaurant while he was in college. They engaged in a relationship and they had and conceived me. Came from two very different worlds, but my father was trying hard to be a hippie to the best of his ability. And we grew up in the middle of nowhere on a communal farm for the first couple of years of my life, organic fruit and vegetables, old farmhouse.
Healthy living.
Yeah,
Beautiful
healthy living, marijuana. Yeah, stuff like this.
Marijuana.
Yeah, marijuana in the woodshed. Hippie lifestyle. Things that they imagined would be the case ended up not being the case. Because as you get older and as reality hits in, and you have sons and you have to provide for the family and whatnot. Things start to change.
Jesse, where did John Adams come from originally? Then became a founding father of America.
By the late 18th centuries from Boston. So my father's mother is a Bostonian.
Right. And what about on the other side? What about on the other side of the pond? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know much about that part of our history. My mother's working class side of the family is part Native American.
Oh, wow.
Part like German Welsh, and so that's more your working class immigrant. Well, my father's side of the family is Swedish, Morton's son. They chopped off the S-O-N. That's where I got my name from. Right. And then the old British lineage along the line of my grandmother on my father's side. Her name was Burt. Her last name was Burt, going all the way back to England and Wales. So
religiously, what were you? What was your religious ideology or philosophy of practice, if you had any? As a family?
Well, my father was a hippie, but my mother was a small town working class. So my whole life has been subject to like class divide, background divide, religious divide, spiritual divide. So my father didn't really necessarily even take religion seriously at all. But the problem was my father started to cheat on my mother at a very young age and started to basically be absent from the home, but we were living in the middle of nowhere. So my mother started to beat her children very bad. And that's where the very first onset of trauma that was related to my own progression. No, I don't blame, what I experienced in life with what I became later on. But in order to seek refuge from child abuse, I oftentimes found myself at my grandmother's house, where I was able to walk to her church and get involved in church. So I would say I was brought up a Christian, but brought up in a household that was dysfunctional, that I tried to stay cognitively out of and physically out of as much as possible.
Which is very
mostly
Jesse, which is very normal of a young person who goes through this type of abuse, maybe, or trauma. They have a tendency to break away from the reality of normality of life.
Dissociation.
In association.
You fly. So the majority of my youth, where other people were spent playing, I was trying to figure out why I was getting abused by the person that brought me into the world and that was supposed to love me more than anybody else on the planet. And in the process of doing that, you learn two things. You become an old man too soon, but you're still a child. You don't grow.
That's true.
Right. So there's a part of you that's unable to control your behavior, but your mind is able to construct and understand complexity and multidimensional analysis, which a lot of radicals can relate with. In some ways, they're highly intelligent.
Very intelligent.
What's faulty is their decision making.
It's the emotional,
because they're disconnected from their body and their mind.
If I throw this in, I think it is a lack of emotional intelligence, emotional engagement.
Yes.
And I think that's
you really can't control it, right? So when you're traumatized, you're triggered, you're in fight, flight, freeze, everything around you is a threat. You're constantly living in a state of threat. So when you try to make sense of that threat as you get older, you make sense of the threat, because that's what the conspiracy theories, that's what the extremist narratives do. They tell you, this is not your fault. This is the Jews' fault. This is not your fault. This is the American imperialist fault. And then you're like, oh, calm. Okay, it's not my fault. Now here's my community, and they're going to love me because I didn't get the love elsewhere. Oversimplification, but certainly.
No, Jesse, I work very closely with a lot of individuals who are who become gang members, who become gang affiliates. And the psychology of radicalization and the grooming process is not that different to how certain gang members work. It's a very similar type of process. And what's interesting is they both elements or both forms of radicalization or grooming use the same process of honing into the very vulnerable aspects of that individual. May that be not having a mom there, or not having emotional engagement, not having someone that they can love. There's someone who should have been there but wasn't there, like a dad wasn't there, out of the picture, and suddenly this third person comes into the picture. Is like, hello, I'm here to help you. I understand you. I care for you. I know sometimes it does seem very oversimplified. Yeah. But Jesse, you've seen it yourself.
Yeah. There's a surrogate family associated with involvement in a gang. And more and more so, extremist collectives, particularly in-person extremist collectives, are resembling gangs. Like, you got little neo-Nazi factions walking around. It's like typically 7 people. Small. They might be interconnected on the internet to everyone, but in small town communities, they're operating like small cliques, small gangs. And there are distinguishing characteristics in the research literature that differentiate between the drivers of why a person would become involved in a gang versus the drivers of why a person would become involved in radicalization. But the one thing we never talk about is, we always talk about individuals and susceptibility to radicalization. We talk about radicalization as if it only occurs with one person. We don't ever talk about the context.
Brilliant.
We don't ever talk about the culture, because the idea that extremists or gangs have culture is like abhorrent to us. Yeah. But the culture of extremism gives you a comprehensive, totally like personal, social, economic, and every variable of life, ideological, every variable is covered in its one cohesive narrative. It's not just an ideology, it's a culture.
It is culture. It is a family.
And that's what gangs offer.
It's a system. It's a way of life. It is love. It's an identity.
Yeah, all of that.
I come from a sociology.
So that's where that belonging becomes so strong, because it covers every factor that you're looking for. Do you know what I mean? It was the same for me back in my past. It's that sense of belonging it gives you is, people don't understand how strong the sense of belonging is that a group can give you. I think that's something that people should realise. It's not just about the group. Sometimes people in the groups aren't even racist. It's that sense of belonging they're craving. They go with crowd kind of thing.
Yeah. And what happens over time is conformity and groupthink sets in. And so you lose yourself to the group. And even the group loses itself to the bigger group, because everybody's competing with each other, trying to be the biggest extremist and become Oswald Mosley in the case of National Action, or Osama bin Laden in the case of Al-Qaeda. It's that imaginary idealistic figurehead that propels the narrative of the group, or the way that you visualize how that exists, even though you never get to touch it, taste it, see it, or feel it. Yeah. Those idealisms become the group consciousness, and you conform to that. That's your culture. So you lose yourself in the group, even though the group, we all know from being in extremist movements, those that have been, including Ivan, that like you see all the contradictions, the hypocrisy, and you know when you sit with yourself that a lot of the things that are said in the group you don't necessarily agree with, but you wouldn't dare say it out loud.
And that's very true with any. In fact, even if you were part of a religion,
ostracized.
You become ostracized, you become the focal point of people's aggression. And but I'm from a sociological background, and in sociology, there's a whole discussion around subcultures. Now, within our normal mainstream cultures, for example, Pakistani or Indian or Bengali, you still have subcultures. There's pop culture within Bengali, for example, or rap culture within Indians, for example. It's a similar type of format. But because within sociology, the study of people within societies, so this has been because you've touched on a very good point, Jesse, that for that individual, that becomes everything. They live in that, they talk in that, they engage in that, they think in that world. And people forget. We think, hey, why do you think like this for? Why do you live like this for? But the truth of the matter is that has become everything. And it has a lot to do with, sometimes to do with things which they lack in their life when they were young. So Jesse, bringing you back in the conversation and going back to where you are a young man who's at his granny, Nana's, was it Nana's house or grandma's house?
Yeah, we call it Nana.
Yeah, you call it Nana. Your Nana's house. Yeah. All right, and you're there. You're trying to make sense of the world. You become, like you said, it's trying to make sense. 1 minute, someone who needs to love me, care for me. All right, she's done this to me. So where did you go from there? Did you start affiliating with maybe antisocial behavior? Were you that type of young man, or did you become studious and start to work even harder? What did you become?
Well, a little bit of both. But I will say, to start this answer to response to the other thing, the reason that people can't leave is because if they leave the movement or they leave the collective, the extremist collective, then they really go back to having nothing else. And so that's my narrative, right? Is looking for that belonging and an opportunity to be safe in an alternative community, because my mother started really beating us bad, and I became a person who developed this inability to care for myself. I thought kind of the meaning of life was to sacrifice myself to protect others from suffering, which is a good quality to have, but not when you can't control your own behavior and when you become prone to desire risk as a means of self-destruction. Because like when your mother doesn't love you, you don't know how to learn how to care and to appreciate and how to love yourself. So you have to learn it from somewhere else. Wow. And you have to teach it to yourself. And anybody that's self-educated is never going to learn as fast as a person who has a proper teacher. And so throughout life, I found myself taking what was going on in the home and trying to hide it at school. I was always intellectually curious, so I was always interested in a different sort of set of thinking, right? But the problem is that I saw the culture that I grew up in didn't recognize the abuse and didn't care. So I saw the consumerism, the materialism, the hypocrisies of my own society, where other people would have been able to accept them and see that with nuance, there was some value and utility in it. I began to hate my society because I know now my society didn't rescue me. My society didn't see me. My society didn't understand what I was going through inside. And
by saying that, were you just expecting them to look at you and to look at your circumstances and then come out to support you? Or were you loud enough to say, help me? What were you doing?
Yeah. People react to abuse in different ways, right? So like my sister was very much a silent victim of child abuse, in the sense that she couldn't even articulate. It was all about survival for her. So she would never be able to say, but I was the one that stood up to the oppressor.
Right.
So I told my grandmother, I told my father, I told guidance counselors at school, you know, and I actually got the courage to tell the school when I was about 15. And I told the guidance counselor, because I started to misbehave, you know, You become that black sheep. You internalize that. You become that self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that it's important. We now know a lot more in these days, but we still don't know enough. Whenever you see a small child acting out and unable to control what they're saying or what they're doing, hyperactivity and these things, you should really investigate not whether or not there's something wrong with the child, but whether or not there's something unsafe about the environment that the child is coming from or what they have experienced. And that's an opportunity to recognize these things early on, but we don't. We usually just say Jesse's a bad kid. And so at about the age of 14, 15, my grades started to go toward the end of middle school. Middle school ends here in 8th grade. You start high school, 9th grade. Everything went from straight A's, enrichment class, being able to cope by being successful at sports, by being, an overachiever, an outgoing individual. And then everything went boom, right? Because when you start to hit teenage years, then you're starting to deal with all kinds of new things like puberty and the onset of these social relationships that unfold at school. And it just got hard to keep it all together. So I told a guidance counselor that I was getting abused at school, and he took it seriously. He called my mother in, but she was able to lie out of it. And after that point,
I want to hold you there. So you told a guardian counselor. This guardian counselor made a decision to contact the abuser.
Yeah.
Which would be mad if someone did that now.
Yeah. This is back in the.
Do you know what I'm saying?
This would have been the early 90s. So, and the guidance counselor I trusted because he was my soccer coach.
Yeah.
And so I went from being like a very good soccer, we call it soccer, not football here. Very good soccer player. And I
would have ripped you on that, but I'll choose not to.
Sorry. Yeah, very good. So, yes, so I felt embarrassed because I was falling off and couldn't control myself. So I was frustrated. I was starting to smoke weed, do all these things. And I myself was just exhausted. The psychological abuse was overwhelming. So I entrusted him because I thought was someone who would listen to me.
Yeah, of course.
I did and had started getting the reputation as like a black sheep or a bad kid. And so when I spilled my guts to him, his decision was not to call the authorities and to conduct an investigation, which is what would go on now. His decision was to call my mother in, and my mother said, "Oh, he always makes up stories like this. He fights with his brother over the weekends," and and they took her side, or they at least didn't take it seriously. And after that, my trust with my community, my trust at school, completely tanked. Yeah, everything started to go downhill. I ran away.
When you said, Jesse, that why you started to feel this sense of alienization in a way, because you did speak, you did shout, you did tell them, "Hey, I'm getting hurt here, man."
Yeah.
They listened, but then they didn't listen.
And I understood why my family didn't want to intervene. Like my father, he was just too busy. And I know that for him, it was something that, like, when he would see bite marks on the inside of my legs or bad bruises, bites on my neck or scratch marks through my skin, he would take me to her mother, my mother's mother, and show her. Nobody wants to turn in their own daughter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to call the cops on your own daughter. You're just going to tell the boy who's getting abused to stay strong. And I could feel that she loved me, but she was more interested in protecting her daughter than she was doing what was right in the situation. So that was difficult to grapple with, psychologically speaking. But then it takes a lot of courage to out an abuser because you're conditioned in your brain to keep the secret. And when I did that and it failed,
especially for someone you love,
spiraled out of control.
Jesse, I'm sorry, I jump in because because this is a conversation. This is a discussion. Yeah, if it was only a question and answer thing, it would be slightly different to that. Sure. Now, no, Jesse, because this is someone that you love ultimately, right? This is someone that you love, and that's the emotion of love, or the feeling of love, is a very powerful one. And I think in my own personal experience, I have seen exactly that, because I deal with a lot of people who are engaged in criminality and things like that. Mm-hmm. And when I say the word, when I start talking to them, and especially from my background, and I start saying that God loves you or someone loves you, they're like, suddenly they become kids. Yeah. They go back into the hole and they become something completely different.
Yeah.
So you are in this situation where, of course, outing the abuse is difficult because it's someone that you love and etc. What happens then? Where do we go then?
By the age of 15, I'm completely frustrated. I was about to turn 16 when I ran away. I just took off. It's a long story in between what happened between then and there. But long story short, I got to the point where if I would have hit back or not hit back, I would have hurt myself. Right. So my friends were starting to use heroin. I was starting to, just lose control over my body, drifting, having very serious thoughts. And I think I was depressed too, but I just always have been able to just persevere. My reaction to it was always just hyperactivity, just keep fighting, just keep moving so you don't have to think about things. I ran away at 15.
Yeah, so wow. Okay, which in our societies, in a way, is something that we have developed. Young men don't cry.
Nope. Yeah.
Young men don't express their emotions and feelings.
Yep.
Right? Don't cry like a girl. Right? I came across something, it was on Netflix a while ago, or something called The Mask That We Wear. And it's a very powerful documentary, Jesse. And it spoke about young boys, how their community, their societies stop them from becoming emotional. They can't express, they can't talk like that, they can't engage with people. So what they do is they create barriers and they create walls around them to look macho.
Yeah.
So you become 16, you run away. Where did you run to?
I ran to New York City, where my father was from, but downtown Manhattan, behind what they call Port Authority Bus Terminal. There's a drop-in center for homeless peoples that you don't have to register with the city to sleep in. And you can go, if you find a place to stay or you hustle up a hotel room, you can go there instead. So it's an easy, convenient space. But it's also full of drugs and homelessness. And clearly, I mean, I looked like I was 14 and I looked shell-shocked. I was pretty much traumatized to the point where I was out of my body when I arrived. And I started by eating, food that people would throw away in the trash can, and then learned skills to hustle, and gradually progressed. And then that opportunity for community and belonging for the first time in my life really came into play when the hippie band we have here in the United States, a hippie band called the Grateful Dead, that basically starts from the 1960s and was like the electric Kool-Aid acid test, LSD and music.
Welcome to the colorful world.
Yeah, exactly. And so this band travels all over the country, and there's a counterculture that's associated with it that's very popular here in the United States. And so they came into Madison Square Garden to play a concert. I met some concert goers. Seemed like an easy place to survive. And of course, your brain is, what your brain wants to do is it wants survival first and foremost. And it's always going to choose a path that gives it an ability to survive the best. So I chose this course rather than be homeless. And I pretty soon spent several years of my life traveling around with the Grateful Dead, selling drugs in concert parking lots, going into concerts, eating hallucinogenics, and living a very hippie-based lifestyle. But at one point, it started to shift to the point where all of the other narcotics that were spreading into the United States in the late 1990s with opiates and a lot of cocaine, I started to use narcotics as well. So addiction became a very key theme of my life. And I found myself incarcerated. And it was there at the age of 18, almost 19, that I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I didn't know anything about Islam.
Stop there.
We lost Ivan.
I know. I don't know why. I hope he comes back. You know what you just said there? Then I read the biography of Malcolm X.
Yeah, you've heard that before, huh?
Because that's my story.
Yeah, a lot of people. The life changer, man. It's a powerful book.
I was
powerful book.
It's one of the powerful. I was 15 when I read it. And I was studying in my lifestyle is slightly different to yours. I was in a boarding school where I studied. And when I picked this book up, I can't believe it. The journey I went through mentally, my man, was shocking. Shocking.
Turned you inside out.
It completely turned me around. And I didn't know you're gonna. I really didn't know that you're gonna throw that at us. You know what I'm saying? So you were in that state. You are, because the thing that the picture you are painting, Jesse, it's a killer one. It's been through crap, went through crap, had a lot of problems, a lot of issues were going on, went away from family, traveling around, getting up to drugs, up to mischief, selling, buying, all of that. From that to where you are today it seems like a complete different world to me.
Mm-hmm.
So you just shared something with us that you read or started to read the biography of Malcolm X.
Yeah.
Hit me.
Well, I mean, the best way to describe it is my introduction to Islam was through Malcolm, not Muhammad. But the way that I interpreted Malcolm, because he resonated with me, he had suffered from, even though I wasn't African American, I felt like I had suffered from discrimination because my father was never financially successful. So I grew up in a very poor working class situation. And I felt like a lot of the elitists or the wealthy liberals, in fact, in my community, were, in a sense, judgmental and not interested in looking at the role that they were playing in things. So I had a lot of anger, class resentment, class anger, opened me up to far leftism. And in Malcolm, I saw a traumatized individual that here I was in jail for the first time as a consequence of my negative beliefs. So it was helpful for me to see that all of those energies of that.
Did you just say I was in jail?
Yeah, that's where I read it. It went to jail for my first time, and that's where I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, where I had finally a moment in that cell to stop for me.
How did you get to the jail?
I was selling drugs at a concert in State College, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Passing through town, and I got arrested for a lesser charge. I ditched the narcotics, but still got arrested for, like, causing drama, like running from the cops, fleeing and evading. To ditch what would have ended up being years in jail became months in jail, quite honestly. And my first day in jail, I didn't know what to expect. All of a sudden, I wake up early in the morning. I'm tired. The guard says, "Anybody want to go to the library?" And I couldn't find any good book on the shelf because most of the books on the shelf at county jails are trash. But I did find one that was of interest to me, and it was, in fact, the autobiography of Malcolm X. Went back to sell, read it like 4 times in like 4 days. Yeah, I just kept devouring it. I mean,
what kept you. What's the word now? What gripped you exactly?
Well, I always
know
wanted
what it did.
Deeper meaning.
It did something to me, my man. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But you tell me.
The writing style and the trajectory of transformative narrative of this individual who is the embodiment of a street hustler.
Man.
Smart, gifted, but unformally educated. Comes from trauma and has conquered that through the streets. But then on the streets lives and learns a skill set that ends up ultimately in his incarceration. But when you think about his life circumstance, he could have been anybody he wanted. And in fact, he becomes something that elevates him, in my opinion, at the time, particularly, and to some degree now, above and beyond the rest, because he's willing to transform his understanding of the truth and reality at the drop of a dime. And that was always my definition of a man. If I'm searching for truth, then when I find it, I have to be able to grab a hold of it. And when I read this, here's this person who's undergoing the. Now, in the beginning, it's not for me because I'm the white devil. But then here comes this chapter where Malcolm goes against the leadership of the Nation of Islam and travels to Saudi Arabia, where he makes Hajj.
No, Jesse, 1 second. In fact, the bit before, he is you.
Yeah. You live.
No. The bit before he starts saying white devils and this and that. Yeah. That's you. That's Malcolm X you.
Right.
How he came to prison. He was a hustler. He was a pimp. He was the man on the street, wheeling and dealing, right? Mm-hmm. Going around and doing his thing, and bang, he comes into prison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you're reading that and you can draw certain parallels from it. Now, you know that Malcolm X became a social justice warrior, but for the first time I was able to dissect what I always thought in my life Islam was what the Nation of Islam was. Right. I never understood anything about the true religion of Islam. So I'm thinking Malcolm's beautiful and this book is really speaking to me and it's drawing me. And then I have this little lag while I'm reading it. I can remember exactly what it was like to read it through the first time. I can go back there.
Tell me.
Spiritually. And you're reading it and you're like, oh, but this guy believes that the white man is devil. So this is no role model. This is there's no ideology here I can adopt, but I can adopt the archetype, the figurehead, the way he lived. And then all of a sudden it sets you up for a broad smack in the face. Because here he goes and he makes Hajj and he finds out that the leader that told him that white people weren't even allowed in Mecca to perform the ritual of Islam, that is circumambulation of the Kaaba, Now he's narrating to you through Alex Haley, the author of the book, that I walk around with white people with blue eyes, and I realize that we are all one humanity. And then he comes back and he completely, again, drops something he gave his life to, that he made a household name in the United States because he was the most gifted speaker for that. And because he found the truth, was able to immediately say that my leader was wrong and I want to be a true Muslim. So here I'm like, wow, so there is a objective truth out there for me to find out about. Now, part of me still idealizes the hustler in Malcolm. I felt, you know how the streets, you have to have had your fill before you're ready to give them up, because there is an element of the streets that is rather exciting, particularly for someone who craves risk and excitement. So I did not transform my life right away.
But that's what respect. The weird thing is that someone who's been there, done it, is something that, see, I'm a qualified youth worker, and I work with a lot of young people. And one of the key things I've seen is they will talk about some of the most notorious characters. They talk about these hustlers. They talk about these gangsters. The head of Gooch Gang or Doddington or what. These are local gangs where I'm from. Now they will mention these people, and they will see them as models, as archetypes, right? Because they admire the cars, they admire the girls, they admire the money, they admire the thing. But like you said, that's within us, because we want to have money, we want wealth, we want name, we want women in our arms, right? We still like that. That's something that is favorable to us. But the essence is once you step beyond that and you're saying, 1 minute, this is different. And for me, that's exactly what Malcolm X is. That is for you, my man. So hit me. So what happens then?
Yeah. So basically, I get out of jail. It was a brief stint. I continue to live a negative lifestyle, and then one day I'm hustling with someone in downtown Philadelphia, because I'm a hippie and I'm a street hustler, so I move around a lot.
So you didn't convert to Islam? You didn't convert to Islam?
Not right away. I was open and interested in religion. So my whole life was spent hiding this person inside of me, one of my parts, that was intellectually curious. Always reading. My friends never read. I would be reading like really sophisticated stuff from the time I was a very young kid, but always hiding it. I didn't want anybody to think that I was like, you know, interested in such matters, because most of the people that I was growing up around were working class, and we were on the street from a very young age. You know, it was better to play sports and, you know, pretend you were a jock than it was. So
where did that come from? That aspect of you, was that because looking at what you've told us about your background, it didn't seem like there was someone that you were modeling yourself with. Where did that come from?
My father was a hippie when I was like 1 and 2 years old, but he never cleaned his bookshelf because he became a construction worker, became an adulterer, became really not a very good person. As far as like, I can't blame just my mother for the abuse because of the way the relationship was going, but he never cleaned the bookshelf off. And so he had very high quality sort of fictional works, had a very good collection of I would say 60s counterculture books, which talk a lot about your soul. You know, there's Be Here Now, for example, was on the shelf, right? Jack Kerouac was on the shelf, right? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was on the shelf. And this is when you're a 9-year-old reading those books, you open up a whole different world. And the writing style is just utmost. You can't help but appreciate good writing if you ever come in contact with it. It's why it's one of the best ways to prevent any susceptibility to radicalization in the first place. If you want people to be able to be critical thinkers and think with complexity, you give them powerful fiction. If you know how to teach it, you'll grab them, right? And that's the art of creativity, creating that sort of susceptibility. So in some ways, my radicalization through my curiosity was a positive, in the sense that I developed a character that was believing in a truth instead of my truth, and searching for that truth outside of myself. But I didn't know how to search for it unless I just left myself float. Right. You know, so I would just drift around and see what happened. And my life is always in like the Forrest Gump of jihad, if you will, right?
I love that. So, the Forrest Gump of jihadists. My main man, Ivan Humble, I know he's off screen at this moment in time.
I think he's gone.
No, he's still there. We can hear him. We can talk to him. We can hear you,
man. Can he hear you, not see you?
But we can't see you. My brother, are you doing hijab? Are you doing hijab? Are you doing hijab?
I don't know what's happening. My camera's saying it's working, but it's obviously not working.
It's okay.
So
it's cool.
I'm
You can
still
do
here,
this as
Jesse.
well.
Don't worry, I'm still listening.
What about if you?
I thought you were gone, Ivan. I'm
No,
sorry.
if you want to do this, you can go off and come back in again. That's cool as well. All right. If not, we can stay in conversation.
Yeah.
So Jesse,
Yeah.
Carry on. I'll drop 8.
cool. Okay, Jesse. So from here, now we know you're a bit of a floater. You've not entirely committed to any ideology, any way of thinking, any religion, and nothing like this. Yeah. Now you're still doing what you're doing, but there must be something in your heart and your mind, keep on poking you and thinking, you know what? I need to find something.
Yeah, I always was looking for it. I mean, from the time that I would walk back when we still lived on the farm when I was a kid, and I would walk back, I had a 3/4 of a mile lane, basically, I had to walk back to get to my home. And I used to always think the abuse has to be for a reason. There's got to be a purpose behind why we're here. And I've got to be going through this in order to find something special on the out, and so I was always curious. And I thought I found it in sort of the counterculture that was, hippiedom or far leftism. But then when I left and I had read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I was still living a criminal lifestyle, but I was also on the side, just like I always have been, reading books about spirituality and religion.
Right.
And so I started to read about Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism in general. I started to read about Islam, but because of Malcolm's influence, I was very interested in Islam. And I've always been rational. I wanted my religion to be reasonable. And so in my devouring of books, and then also I was already politicized because I was already a revolutionary. So I wasn't a hippie that was a pacifist. I literally was like, you would say the far left of Antifa are today. Oh, wow. I was really like, let's tear down capitalism.
Right.
I wanted to devour capitalism, tear down the world. So I would say I was very much a far leftist at that point, but looking for
your economic philosophy, social philosophy was a socialist, you would say, at that time?
Yeah, I was an anarchist. So I was devouring Chomsky, but not Chomsky's political works. Chomsky's works on the theory of anarchism, and that led me to follow Bakunin and all of the others, and so retained that. Largely what I ended up doing was a lot of that early far leftism I form fit onto Islam because it's compatible with Osama bin Laden's economic critique, right? So I was responsible for creating Sharia compliant finance that would take an anarchist bend and push Sharia compliant finance in a way where the jihadists could talk about it.
Osama bin Laden come into conversation? Because we're talking about a time where YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and these type of platforms were probably just coming up, were not that as prevalent.
This is before 9/11. So the internet was around, but it was a very different era.
What, 2007,
now I will
2008?
Say this is 1998, 1999. Yeah, I'm 42 years old, man. I'm old.
Peace, bro.
Yeah.
Peace, bro.
Yeah. So this is before. So when I started to explore religion, I used it depends on how you look at things. I feel old, man. That's for sure. So it's in this era, it was before 9/11, but I was interested in this religion, and Islam was growing in the United States very much in the late 1990s because the University of Medina in Saudi Arabia was sending back a lot of African-American imams, and I usually found myself, I could relate a lot more with inner city youth and African-Americans than I could my own people. So I found myself hustling a lot in inner city environments, found myself in Philadelphia hustling alongside of somebody who was supposed to be a Salafi.
Right.
But he came from North Philly, where the Salafis are, a lot of times they have their own trauma. They find Islam in prison. They come home. They don't necessarily hold on to it much, or they hold on to it to a degree, but they also miss $500 to $1,000 a day on downtown hustles. So they'll slip off downtown every once in a while and do what people do and not let the community know about it. And that was the situation I found myself in. One night, really late, running uptown to North Philly, which is one of the low-income areas of the United States, one of the worst ghettos, I guess you would call it. And we're copping drugs for a rich corporate exec who's holed up in a hotel, going to serve him, and make money off of it. But we're coming out of the projects, and here come the lights from the police, and they tell us to lay down. And we don't. We run into what they call an abandonment in Philadelphia, and we hide behind this drywall. And he turns to me and he says, just say these words after me, brother, and everything's going to be okay. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I have no clue what the hell the guy's saying because I don't know Arabic, but he explains it to me and we get away. And so I think, man, this must be a miracle. You know, go back. This must be a miracle. Sorry, my kids just walked in. They're gonna go back to the room till we finish up. So he says the Shahada to me, the declaration of faith to the Muslims, and we do get away. The police don't find us. So I think divine intervention. We get into a cab. He says, "I'm gonna take you to my wife's house." Take you to the wife's house. The wife comes down, and he says, "Just tell her you converted to Islam. She'll let you come in." So in fact, she does, and I end up spending the night there. And in the middle of the night, I wake up. And I go to the bathroom, and there's Mus'haf, Quran, sitting open on a shelf. And I'm intrigued because I've been reading a lot about this religion, but never dove into the actual Quran. I've been reading stuff online, to some degree. But what I was most interested in was the scientific compatibility of the Quran with science. And that, of course,
which is truly
Westerners.
Yeah, there you said it. Which is truly the way the Westerns engage with a religious text anyway. Is it scientifically compatible or not?
Yeah, exactly. That's how you want it to be. And Islam
is it
has
logical or not?
Islam has a very powerful way of
enticing
of doing that.
Definitely.
And it is beautiful. And so basically I go in and I pick the Quran up for the first time, and I open up. I miss Fatiha because it's usually on a page by itself, which is the first chapter of Quran, the first actual verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter. Basically leads the Quran, and this is a book wherein there's no doubt a guidance for the people of taqwa. Yeah, and so this concept just grabs me in the moment because I'm tired. I was doing drugs. I was on the streets all night, and I don't know if it was that or if it was really that Iman entered my heart. We'll find out when we die. But suddenly I'm overcome by this spiritual bath of peace for the first time in my entire life. He wakes up and I tell him I want to convert. He go convert, and I become a Muslim. And I don't have anywhere to go, so I stow away on a Greyhound bus to continue to live the lifestyle I'm living in. I don't know that I just became a Muslim and that there's obligations associated with that. So I go try to hustle, and I stow away on a bus. I end up in Richmond, Virginia, and I get arrested.
Boom.
When I end up one more time, and when I end up in jail in Richmond City, in Richmond City jail, I don't get a bond because I'm from out of state, and I'm in an open cell block with 40 individuals, and I throw my mattress on the floor. Nobody will pick it up except for one guy, and he was Afghan. He was a Moroccan veteran of the Afghan Soviet Jihad, and he grabs my mattress. He doesn't even know I'm Muslim, and as I got to know him, he starts to teach me Islam.
Wow. So the way you've come into the deen, right? It's very sincere. There's no real ideologue. It's not that you got influenced by a certain person or individual. In a way, you etched your own journey. And this I have seen in my own experience as well, that a lot of people do that. They may come to the door of the Salafism or Wahhabism or whatever it is, but there is a sense of sincerity and genuineness in finding that exact pathway. So you are back in prison. You got this guy that you...
This time, for 5 months, I would be taught how to pray. I would be taught how to fast. And once I memorized the prayer in Arabic, he tells me, now you're ready to become a real Muslim. He tells me, go into the shower and make ghusl, wash every inch of your body. And when you come out, I give you a new identity. I give you a new name.
Wow.
And he changes I hated Jesse Morton. I couldn't stand myself. So I was all about this. He gives me the name Younus Abdullah Muhammed, and he tells me your name is Younus because Younus is Jonah in the Quran. He was swallowed by the whale. Who
was Zachary Adam?
Oh, that comes much later. That comes much later. We'll speed it up to get up that way.
No. You don't need to speed it up. Jesse,
how long do we have?
Jesse, look, we have all the time in the world with you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and it's really up to you, my man. This is why
it might take till tomorrow. It's a pretty long.
It's not a problem. Jesse, look, the reason why our conversation is like this, my man, is that to contextualize exactly what happens to a person. It's not fair. You know, it's easy. Yeah. It's easy. Oh, you come in, one bang, 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 hour, you have a chat and think, then you're gone. You don't really get to the essence of what that human being is. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's the issue that we have, because I, like myself, I work with a lot of people that I get to know over months and months. And then I start understanding, oh, 1 minute, I know where this guy came from. Oh my God, this guy's a weird trajectory in life. And that's the thing here with you as well, Jesse. I think your life to this point, to that particular point, is like, wow, crazy, but that's your life, my man. Yeah. So you did this 5 months.
And right? In the course of that, this man became somewhat of a father figure to me. He was disseminating to me knowledge that I had never had before, and he was cementing my conviction in Islam, and everything was about spirituality and the rules of the religion. But when he gives me my new identity, he gives me a name, Younus Abdullah Muhammed. So Younus, of course, is Jonah in the Bible. He runs from God's commands, swallowed by the whale, spit back out on the shore, and then returns to the people of Nineveh, and is actually one of the most successful messengers, according to the Quran, in the sense that after he goes through trial and tribulation, he becomes so powerful that they actually take his message and the entire community is saved. So he tells me, this is your mission, preach Islam to the people. He says, Abdullah is your middle name because you're a slave of God. Remember that you're nothing. You're just dust. Yeah. And Muhammad is the person that you should follow the most. And he introduces me to the concepts of the ahadith. And then one day we're praying. We call the Fajr, early morning call to prayer, right, the Adhan. And it wakes up a Christian who is angered. Yeah. And he stands in front of the prayer, in front of the Moroccan. And the Moroccan tries to move him, but he doesn't move. So the Moroccan, a little guy, 5'6", stands up and fights him and gets beat up really bad. He got really beat. And I never saw violence attached to prayer in my entire life. I didn't understand. So after the aftermath of this, I ask him, like, why did you fight? And he tells me, the Prophet Muhammad has given us in a hadith, in a narration attributed to him, that if a person comes and stands in front of your prayer, gently try to move them to the side with your right hand. And if they do not move, then stand up and fight them, for verily they are a shaitan. And I was blown away.
So after that point,
and I was blown away.
And that's like, yeah, you just were introduced to religion as a faith, as a dogma, as a philosophy, as a spiritual tradition, violence.
Yeah, it was difficult. It took a long time for desensitization for that to happen. But the way he was able to explain it didn't tell me about violence, and it didn't talk to me about the importance of jihad, because this is prior to 9/11. What he told me was that there was definitely going to be a war between good and evil, because the kuffar and the Muslims, because the black flag had been raised in Khorasan in Afghanistan. And he told me about the prophecy that the black flag of the Islamic Sharia legislation.
This is where your drop started.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And he tells me that they'll never accept Taliban ruling with Sharia law in Afghanistan, and that soon there will definitely be a war, and that this is the end of war. So he tells me about the end of times prophecies, way before ISIS did so to get their recruits, way before 9/11. And Al-Qaeda didn't talk much about end of times prophecy that much. It wasn't part of their dogma. Yeah, they did. But it opened me up, because here was my far leftism. I didn't like Israel because of reading Chomsky and Finkelstein. And the prophecy says the black flags will be raised in Afghanistan and they will not be stopped until they reach Jerusalem.
You are the fertile land. You became, Mr. Jesse Curtis Morton became the, the fertile land to get or produce or develop or sow the seed of someone who's going to do something about it.
But at the same time, I leave there after 5 months and I go and I totally change my life. Instead of go back to hustling, I go to a Salvation Army in Syracuse, New York. I pray 5 times a day. I fast. Wow. I start to study my religion. I have peace and stability in my life for the very first time. And then 9/11 comes.
Right. Now, before... Go for it, my man. This is huge.
So 9/11 comes, and where everybody else is looking at the TV screen in shock and horror, I don't know why, but this is honest to God truth. Wallahi. I was asleep. They woke me up. They said, come look at the TV. I get up. I look at the TV. They know I'm Muslim, but they tell me I'm in a Christian program, so I have to keep it on the down low, which I understood. And I look at the screen and I say, oh, shit, we're going to war with the Muslims. Instinctively. And went right back to sleep.
And at that moment,
it didn't faze me at all because I had been told about it by my.
But you didn't. Did you know at that time that these were Muslims or Arabs or people?
We knew enough about Osama bin Laden's threat, and a lot of people in the aftermath of that didn't know if it was the jihadists. A lot of them thought that it was Latin American communists, right, because of the history of coups in Latin America coincident to the date of 9/11. So there was some speculation. Most analysts on TV speculated that it in fact was Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, and we soon found out that it was. But by the time George Bush came on national television at Ground Zero and said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, and that we're going to start a global war on terror. Remember, couldn't relate to my own mother, couldn't relate to my community. They didn't save me. They didn't protect me. Nobody seemed to notice me. Nobody seemed to care about me. My recruiter cared about me. The woman who fed me in her house and let me stay and sleep on her couch so I could read the Quran and find Islam cared about me. But I didn't know a lot about love or affection from my own society, so I didn't feel like I was part of it. So when we were forced to make a choice between two, black and whites, I knew one thing: I could not choose us. And I had already an anti-imperialist, anti-American sentiment as a result of that in the first place. So I chose the terrorists. And I felt like I was all living part of destiny, because when he gave me the name and the identity of Younus, I figured, well, I've been spit out of the belly of the beast. I got to go call my people to the truth.
Look at that.
And so that's what I did.
So
you become the radicalizer?
Well, over time, I had to learn, I had to study. And by 2003, when we were talking about going to Iraq, I was living in Harlem, New York on 145th Street. So I was walking the streets that Malcolm X walked. And I was also living alongside of people that knew Malcolm in the Muslim community. And I was respected because I was only one of the only white guys in the community. So I was respected and upheld. Plus, I started to study my religion. So I understood Arabic, and I took it seriously. And so I ended up speaking on 125th Street, where it's major shopping strip. And I would tell African Americans that, like, they took your identity when they sent you here on slave ships, and now they're asking you to fight their wars overseas. The only solution for you, if you really want to save yourself and the souls and save your communities, to go back to the religion of your origin. And when George Bush says you're either with them or you're with the terrorists, say that you were never with us and we will never be with you, and choose and make the choice. Now, I was like, I didn't know that there was other people in the UK. I didn't know Omar Bakri Muhammad existed at this point, right? I didn't know Al Muhajirun had.
This is all you.
Just me expressing my anger, right, and trying to and doing it only in a small, closed African American community. But then I went to a Muslim Day parade in 2004, and I met the Islamic Thinker Society, which was an offshoot of Al Muhajirun here in the United States,
right?
And I joined them right away. And because I was articulate, because I liked to study, and because I had blonde hair, blue eyes, so to say, I looked like one of theirs. It was like they could point to me and say, hey, look, we got one of your own. And so I became a speaker and used that gift of gab and developed an ability to disseminate the messaging. Of course, you
yourself didn't.
Here in the US.
Of course, you yourself didn't feel like a trophy. You felt the calling, didn't you?
Well, also this, you have to, you know the Al Muhajirun template, because you guys are from the UK. So it's Dawah stalls, handing out information, talking to people, going out for Chinese halal after the event, study circles on Wednesday nights in an obscure house in Queens.
It's a community, bro. It's a community. You know what I'm saying, bro?
Yeah. And even though I could tell that they didn't necessarily love me or trust me, they loved me more than anybody else had up until that point in my life. And so here I was with a family.
See, amazing.
And I had spent my whole life alone.
Amazing thing about you is that thread keeps on coming back in. They loved me, nobody else did. They cared for me, nobody else did.
It's the solution, man. If we took so much time to not love the people that already friend us in our echo chambers and to reach across the aisle and get outside of our boxes. And Ivan says this better than anybody else I know. If you just took time to take that one person that's never been hugged, loved, nor shown affection, and you just show them affection one time in their life, that's all it takes. It really, truly is, at least to prevent becoming what I became. If you show them community and you nourish them, then they'll become really productive members of society, and they will unconditionally love you, because when somebody's own mother doesn't love them, they're looking for somebody to put that love that we expect. You know, all the mercy in this whole world comes from the affection a mother shows to its child. And when you abandon that,
what you left,
you cut a person off from
open, prone, you're vulnerable, you're open to all types of deadly.
You can't trust nobody. If you can't trust your own mother, you can't trust nobody.
So tell me, man.
And that's how you live.
Tell me, where does Revolution Muslim come from?
So Revolution Muslim comes from, you know, in extremist, Ivan will tell you this, right? And you know it too from this work. Extremists argue like crazy.
Of course they do.
And they always want to be ahead of each other, and they always want to be the big game in town, and they always want to be the one that gets the attention turned to them. I got bored with Omar Bakri Muhammad and Anjum Chowdhury because they seemed like they were just a puppet show. They seemed like they were just loudmouths. They were all talk, no action. And I started to write Abdullah Faisal in jail when he was in Belmarsh prison over there because of some things he got locked up for right before 7/7 bombings came about. And I was getting pretty notorious with regard to my style of writing and preaching with Islamic Thinkers Society and Al Muhajirun. But at the end of the day, Abdullah Faisal was a bit more extremist, and he was Jamaican, so I could relate with him more from what I had experienced. And so when Abdullah Faisal got out of prison, I had developed a relationship with an individual that had just returned from living in Palestine, who had a prominent presence on this platform that was growing in popularity. They called it YouTube.
Right.
His name was Yusuf Al-Qatal.
Oh.
And Yusuf was interviewed by Richard Dawkins. His stuff was going. So we saw the power of social media, and they wanted to continue to do the Dawah stall thing. And we were like,
Joseph Cohen.
Future's on the internet. Joseph Cohen converted, became Yusuf Al-Qatal, was basically a best friend for many years of my life. He was the co-founder of Revolution Muslim. And then when Abdullah Faisal returned from prison, we went to Al Muhajirun and said, hey, we want to insert Faisal inside of your network. And of course, they're like staunch believers in their own imam. You know, Omar Bakri is God, basically, in their world. Anjum Chowdhury is God's son, so to say. I know.
It does. And Jesse, let me just hold you there, because there's an image that I've just put up. And there was a report written on this as well. They showed the amazing links of this one individual to so much havoc that has taken place in the last 20 years. The guy gets 5 years. Absolutely. The guy gets 5 years, my man. Right?
Yeah.
In fact, this guy should have been slammed in, but he hasn't. But he got 5 years solid, yeah. And he's come out. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing. The problem is that there's generations of individuals that have been impacted, and you on the other side of the pond got influenced by this guy, or at least the ideology.
Yeah. I mean, their ideology was I memorized every single one of their study sessions and Omar Bakri Muhammad's lectures. I spent years of my life inundated with their dogma. Now, there was ways for me to think about things on my own and disagree with them, because I was also interested in Osama bin Laden and Salafi jihadism. Right. And they were not exactly cut and paste Salafi jihadism, but they were the means through which I learned my interpretation of Islam. But I thought they weren't enough because I was angry.
Yes, you were.
And when I had
which in a strange way is the same way I let my interpretation of Islam was off Ajahn Chowdhury.
Well,
hey, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
I always say he wasn't just guilty of radicalizing Muslims. He radicalized plenty of people like me.
And we did it on purpose, because we would talk about that in our closed group discussions, is that what we need to push is polarization. And so when they would show up to do the poppy whatever protests, we would be talking and coordinating about how to platform that to make sure it got in the press, right? And that it would antagonize the domestic kuffar, so that they could cement the notion that we were living in an us versus them world, And so that the same way that the Western anti-Muslim crowd would portray Islam in general as the Islam I was calling to, we would point to the EDL, right, and say that you Muslims is what the non-believers think about you.
Right.
So we created that in many ways on purpose, and it was something that always became a topic and a theme of discourse: is push, division, polarization. And that's what Osama bin Laden described it as. You know, I mean, in his lectures, he said it's like, if you want to conquer an empire, think of yourself as sailing on a raft up a river that's two groups of people that are united together that have built a beautiful dam. And what you have to do is, you don't have enough power to split the dam yourself. But if you can make both sides of those that are on the dam, the liberals and the conservatives, go to war with each other and divide it, they'll destroy the dams for you, and all you have to do is sail right through. And so that was the way that we were connecting polarization to radicalization to extremism. And it is now the way that the reason why my organization now doesn't just talk about radicalization and extremism, we talk about polarization as well, because division and discord facilitates radicalization.
And it does. That's the process, isn't it? And I think you truly have the bull by its horn by doing that, I think. And I know Yusuf al-Khattab's own background is very interesting as well, because he himself being part of the Jewish tradition, going into the Orthodox Judaism, you know, all of that, went to Palestine or Israel. Then the family became Muslim. They went and lived with Palestinians, and you know that whole story. All right, behind that, there's the whole journey around seeing marginalization, polarization, alienization of people that were just living. They were the kids, women, you know. And once again, there is a narrative of grievance. But of course, if someone says, okay, come on, use the gun, the person will say, you know what, give it me, I'll do it. And sadly, that's exactly what extremists do. They create the platform, and then they say, you go ahead and do what you want to. Do you know what I mean? And all they do, the fuel behind that is the individual's own history, which is really, really sad. And people like yourself and other people like Ivan, etc., you become what? You become the victims of someone else's game. Yeah. Sadly. Very much so. You, of course, now you were embedded. You were the founder of an organization which became proscribed, right? It got closed down. 2010 came, and etc. You were going through, you know, the battle against the whole idea of Demonos. Where was Jesse at that time then? What happened then?
So at the same time, it's important to point out, because we tend to believe that extremists are all sort of losers. Islam gave me stability, and I went on to actually get a master's degree in international relations. I managed a nonprofit organization. I became a substance abuse counselor. So on one side of my life, I was still Jesse Morton. But then I had the radical Younus Abdullah Muhammed, who was like my alter ego, you know, functioning. And my organization was very talented at using the internet. So what I did and what Yusuf did and what we said that was different than the jihadists that came before us said was, you guys don't know how to use the internet properly. You do all this stuff on the street. Why you don't have a video camera there while you do it? Exactly. Why don't you upload it to YouTube? Why don't you create products and long lectures and create websites with good graphic design? Why don't you use social media? Why don't you have Facebook accounts? So we did. And our organization, unfortunately, developed things like the English language jihadi magazines. We developed use of a platform called Pal Talk for online discussions, same way Telegram works today. And we created an entire ecosystem of news media output that you could get inundated with jihadist material 24/7. Wow. And it scared the shit out of the people in the West, because in the United States, we could post the jihadist videos as well.
That's exactly what you scared. That's exactly what you scared. People got scared, and that's exactly what came out of us, all right, or the rest of the world, because...
And everything they did to silence us, we could bypass, because there's always an adjustment. There's always a way to tweak. And we were always one step ahead of the game. That's why when people think about silencing ideas it's absolutely it's senseless. It makes no sense. Yes. There will always be an adaptation. You can't silence the idea. You have to better it. You have to develop better ideas, right? And you have to address the grievances. You can't run away from them and pretend they don't exist. And that's another long.
That's a long story, but so it is the core. It is the core of the problem.
All of the radicalizers and the recruiters love when the crackdown comes. It's great if you're a committed ideologue and you're searching for martyrdom and you're not insincere and you're not intimidated. That's what you love.
You do.
Because you're going to challenge them. You want them to arrest you and violate their own laws. You want them to show that they're hypocritical when they talk about human rights. You want them to prove that they're okay with their own people speaking, but they're not okay with you speaking because they can't challenge your ideas. Yes. And it was easy for us because they didn't know anything about extremism. So all I had to do was send somebody, outside of a mosque to hold a banner that said, mushroom cloud over Israel. And I'd be on the front page of the New York Post. All we had to do was, say heinous things to get on CNN, and CNN will come running to interview with us. And they'll say, we're casting light onto darkness, but no, you're actually platforming us and you're giving us a message.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
What you were doing is that you were playing into the fragility of the society itself. This is easy.
And you're getting off of it because you hate your society. Yeah. So for them, you seem mentally ill, but for you, you're tearing down a world that is cruel to others and doesn't recognize it's being cruel to others. So you're a man of justice. You're a man of peace. You literally don't see yourself as a violent extremist. You see yourself as a martyr.
So the idol,
and I know Ivan can relate. You're saving your civilization.
So the false idol,
when you're involved
that you create within your heart and your mind becomes exactly the thing that you start worshiping, which is
because you don't know how to care for yourself.
Wow.
So the idea becomes your identity. And you'll die for the idea because you don't care if you live, because deep down inside, those wounds and that trauma is just consumed you, but it's found a home in something that you find to be peaceful. So you'll do everything to get that victory on this earth. They'll live to see the day when they actually fall and they crumble. Or in the case of far right-wing extremists, you're preserving tradition. You want to stop the communists. You want to stop the socialists. You want to stop the threat against your way of life. You're preserving your way of life. And you'll die for that if you are a committed believer. So there's nothing you can do to really silence that. You can't compete with that kind of commitment and passion.
Jesse, my man, you have just given us a clear understanding of the mindset of a radical individual who goes through a particular process and gets to a place where the world becomes his enemy because on the basis of how he feels in that particular space. And that person is called an Islamist, or he's called an extremist, or he's called, a Muslim extremist, or whatever it is, a radicalist, or whatever you want to call him. That's what he becomes. And he gets a bloody kick out of it.
Yeah. That's the drug.
So
there's no more narcotics.
Right.
The ideology and the risk and the excitement and the adventure, it's the drug. You need it.
Guys, those of you who are going to be listening to this is big stuff.
But I should follow it up and say it's all a lie.
No. I know. Yeah. I'm going to come to that. Bro, I'm going to come to that. It's important because a lot of people don't. When we talk about this, my man, we talk about it so primitively, so simple. All right. People think, yeah. Why? They got radicalized. Why can't they be de-radicalized? My man, there's a process for that. Look how this man got there. Look what you've done, Jesse. That's exactly what you've done. You've explained to us, guys, this is how it works. But it is what did you say? It is a lie. Now, go for it, Ivan.
It's funny you use that term, the drug of choice. That's how I explain the buzz of a demonstration that I used to go on. It was my drug of choice on that day. Do you know what I mean? That adrenaline, that buzz, that effect you got from that day was better than any drug in the world. Do you know what I mean? That high was bigger than anything, as you know, Jesse. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just want to enforce that bit from the other side of the fence. it's the same sort of thing.
Same thing. And what we saw evolve when the EDL came, after years and years of al-Muhajirun planting the seed to set the stage for that, and years of the war on terror neglecting, communities that had needs, and the needs went to build things in Afghanistan and Iraq as opposed to the other alternatives. We saw the same phenomenon formulated on the far right? So we saw that the same protests and the things that would give the misfits something to belong to on the Islamist side was now standing right across the street from a domestic threat. And for us, that was an indication of victory, because we were forced, because in the Islamic text, it's in the end of times, everything becomes against truth and falsehood. Islam enters every house. He who accepts it is honored. He who rejects it is humiliated. The world will become very black and white according to the prophecies that are pointed to by the extremists. So that's exactly what we wanted to see. And we were unfortunately good at what we did. We were connected to 15 different terrorist plots. I graduated with a master's degree and decided that I wanted to get a master's only so I could move to the Middle East. And I moved to Saudi Arabia.
Right.
I live in Saudi Arabia and they throw me out. So I was a professor at Mohammed ibn Saud
You were a bit too extreme for them.
Where,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, the Americans put pressure on them because there was the homegrown violent extremist threat hit home. So Major Nidal Hassan killed people at Fort Hood. Carlos Bledsoe came back from Yemen and killed people in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I was in Heathrow when Omar Abdul Farouk,
yes,
the underwear bomber, was going through Heathrow to fly back to Detroit. They stopped me. They didn't stop him. So he tried to detonate his bomb while flying back into Detroit. So I arrived back into the United States, having been thrown out of Saudi Arabia, knowing that the concern was because Anwar al-Awlaki had been announced as being with Al-Qaeda. It was a personal, associate of mine. And the underwear bomber, so to say, was one of his trainees. And so everything by the time I got back to the United States had heated up to the point where I could have shut up, but I was drunk on the wine.
Yes, you were.
I hadn't had enough.
Yes, you hadn't.
I said, I want to watch them die. I want to watch them destroy themselves. I want to watch them burn. I want to tear down the world in my own image. So rather than stay silent, I turned things up.
Right.
And I was angry because my dream was to leave the United States and live in Saudi Arabia and become a professor and espouse my ideas. And coming back to the United States was a major letdown, and I didn't care whether I really lived or died. And I let an individual operate with me. His name was Zachary Chesser. Amazing to watch the history of radicalization. It used to take us 2 years to radicalize a kid. This kid radicalized in 2 months. One day he woke up and he was an administrator on my website, and he posted a threat against the South Park writers because they were going to portray the Prophet Muhammad in caricature for their 200th episode.
Yeah, that's
and he threatened them, and he said
that's what put you into the center of a lot of attention then, didn't it?
Well, that became an international controversy. So as a consequence of us getting the 200th episode of South Park shut down because of the threat, people in the United States that stood up for free speech started an Everybody Draw Muhammad Day Facebook page. So people would draw heinous pictures of the prophets. And Pakistan and Indonesia threatened to shut down Facebook if they didn't take down the page. It became international controversy. The woman who started the page, she stopped it, but they kept it going. It became every day in the news. Like, our website was ranked like the top 12 websites in the world for like 4 or 5 days. This is how popular the website became in the midst of this controversy. And then Anwar al-Awlaki and Samir Khan took the English language jihadi magazine template that I kind of developed when Samir and him were still in the West. And they launched the first edition of Inspire magazine, which was a reaction to the South Park threat. And that is the first English language jihadi magazine that didn't just espouse the ideology, but it also gave you a recipe how to build a bomb in mom's kitchen.
It did.
And so this situation, I knew I would be arrested, and I fled to Morocco. This happened in 2010. I ended up living in Morocco for almost a year. And while I was there, I had to stay on the run. So I couldn't communicate with Abdullah Faisal. I couldn't communicate with al-Muhajirun. I couldn't communicate with my old jihadist friends because I didn't need to be public. And in those 2 months, I had a Ramadan in Casablanca. And I spent a lot of time in the mosque, and I started to thaw a little bit. I knew I was in trouble, but I felt like I had escaped. And my family and my children were there. And so I would say that the first step for me changing my beliefs was to get away from the group, even if it wasn't by choice. And then the Arab Spring broke out. And all over the world, people were looking at Arab youth standing up to the totalitarian dictatorships that Osama bin Laden ultimately wants to overthrow. So our objective was being removed by populism of youth who didn't want anything to do with Khilafah, who didn't want anything to do with the Islamic State. And that was an important time to think and to contemplate and to have conversations. And
then you chose to do something because you've done time for this.
I was on the run, conversating with the Arab millennial youth. I could tell you many stories. One woman in particular challenged my views. She saw right through me. She said, "This is not you. This facade that you have of fundamentalism." She said, "It's not you." She said, "You know what we want? We want things you grew up with your entire life. You think you hate your system so much." She said, "You can say what you want. You can read what you want." She said, "Look at the press in my country. Wow. There's 2 press outlets. They're both controlled by the state."
This is in Morocco,
I was tutoring.
This is in Morocco.
Yeah, as a Moroccan, I was tutoring her to study for her GMAT test so she could go abroad and study.
I lived in the Arab world myself, and I've got to say, when I came across people of, solid conviction, men and women, it was like, whoa, minute, we're living, we're weaklings compared to these people, and I think you found the right person to rollock you, my man.
Yeah, she challenged me, and the conversations that we had, like I developed good relationships with students that I was tutoring. And I wanted to know how they saw the Arab Spring.
Right.
And so in the evenings, I would be on Russia Today, Press TV, Al Jazeera English, talking about, why the Federal Reserve was at fault for the Arab Spring and all of these conspiracy theories. Not really conspiracy theory in that regard, but some of them crazy. But I found myself removed, and I found myself fascinated with people who wanted things I had taken for granted my whole life, or at least didn't cherish.
Right.
And I would say that's step 2 of my de-radicalization, was looking at, like, you want to force a system on people by force. This is not you, Jesse.
Wow.
You don't believe in this. And now you see that the goal that you have, you think you're trying to liberate people in the Middle East who can liberate themselves, clearly, because they're the ones rising up against these regimes. So it's not the violence. It's not jihad. It wasn't 9/11. These people are out in the streets, and it's spreading all over the world. It was a time for reflection. Ultimately, I did have to do some time. I started to reconsider my beliefs. I think it's a process, not an event. And I found myself picked up. They killed Osama bin Laden.
Which is really amazing because, Jesse, look, you were getting a hit out of this. Every single time something crazy that was happening around the world because of the hands of extremists and radicalists and Islamists or whoever they were, you were getting a kick out of it. Now, and you lived in the drug world. You know what the lure of that is, but you chose to remove yourself from that hit. It's like, that's really
partially.
Okay,
partially because it took it. I don't know where I would be if I wouldn't have been arrested. So I can't say for certain, right? I want to be clear. I was changing and having thoughts inside of myself, but I cannot tell you that, so they put an indictment for me out for my arrest. They released it. It was a sealed indictment in the United States. 2 weeks after they killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad. Now, as soon as that went public, I had decisions to make, and I had just had a newborn son in Morocco. And so I make Salat al-Istikhara when you have a decision to make, because even Yusuf al-Qaradawi says you can go to Libya to fight jihad, and it's right there. And so I called my Quranic teacher up and I told him, I said, I want to go fight in Libya. Can you get me there? He says, of course. And the night that he was supposed to come pick me up, I made Salat al-Istikhara. And I pray and I say, oh God, if this is the way and this is a decision that is good for me, then inspire me to make the right one. If it's bad for me and you have other plans for me, then please give me a sign. This is basically the translation, the essential substance of the prayer. Give me a sign that I shouldn't do this. I don't tell my wife about it or anything. I stand up from the prayer and I have a Down syndrome baby who's a year old and I have a newborn child, and they're both laying awake in the bed looking right into my eyes. and I didn't know what else to do. And I look at my sons and I say, whatever happens, you're not supposed to go. About 5 days after that, I was arrested. And I thought I was going to probably spend the rest of my life in prison. And I regretted that choice. Ended up doing 5 months in Moroccan prison. And I met a preacher who I had translated his lectures. He was one of the people that had been affiliated with the 2004 Casablanca bombings. His name was Mohammed Fizazi. We used to translate this guy's lectures. And right before I went to the prison, they had a big protest in Saleh prison in the Rabat, where they had shot 2 Salafi jihadis because they were keeping them all housed there. And so I'm going into this prison as a hotbed for Salafi jihadism, and I end up on the front page of the Moroccan press as American Al-Qaeda. So Fizazi, Imam, comes to meet me, and I think he's going to give me a badge of honor. And instead, he walks me around the prison yard, and he's changed his opinion. He's de-radicalized, and he's about to be released. And he doesn't even talk to me about the ideology. He talks to me about my childhood. And I'm like, why? What is this guy getting at? So he reactivated memories inside of me I hadn't revisited. And he tells me my life is not over. And we spent time together. And then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, it could have been more, he goes out. I know they left him out on Ramadan with an amnesty. And he writes an op-ed in the Moroccan press. And he describes who he was as a child in an op-ed and why, it allowed him to become what he became. And why he was wrong for believing in what he believed in. And that was my first contact with a former extremist. And then we'll take a break at that part, because then the Americans come and they pick me up 5 months after Moroccan prison. They pick me up on a private plane and they fly me back to the United States.
Wow.
What a journey.
I silenced myself because, my man, so many lives have been taken.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have died.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have been imprisoned
Mm-hmm.
because of this exact ideology.
Mm-hmm. And it became way, 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 way worse. Well, what we laid a seed for is something that I will have to walk around with on me for the rest of my life. I no longer punish myself with shame for who I once was. No matter how many people look at me and tell me they will not forgive me, I've learned how to cope with that. But yes, what we built, the ideology that we disseminated, was dangerous. It was, and it has damaged and destroyed so many lives. So many lives. So many lives. And we were laughing about it the whole time, because really at the end of the day, we were a small collective of individuals in a basement and a couple of people scattered around the world. We just had so much dedication.
So I don't know where I am with this, Jesse. I don't know, shall I be angry? Shall I be frustrated? Shall I scream? Shall I shout? Or shall I just sit back and listen? Because what you're back in America now, you're in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, you've already started to take your steps towards de-radicalization.
But it seems like it's worth nothing, because it seems like I'll die in jail. I'm facing life in prison, yes. Yeah.
Well, so tell me what happens then.
So when in the United States, they keep people in solitary confinement. It's like one of the reasons it took us 2.5 years to, extradite Abu Hamza al-Masri. Is because of the conditions. And they did the same to me. So I spent about 11 months straight in solitary confinement. So I was returned to Alexandria, Virginia, where I live now. And I was in solitary confinement. And I still want to change, but part of me doesn't know what to do, because it doesn't matter if I change or not, right? Because I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison. So there's a part of me that wants to hold on to what I used to be, just so that I don't have to say, man, I threw away my life for nothing. And long story short, a guard starts to take a likening to me and doesn't really necessarily agree with solitary conditions. She works third shift, late at night, 10-hour shifts. So she comes in 4 days a week, and she takes me to the law library where the books of the jail are housed. And on that shelf, because I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, it's a very patriotic sort of historical piece of the American history. The books that are donated at this jail are like biographies of the founding fathers, philosophical books, very affluent academic books.
Right.
So I have a good selection of reading material, and I start to read it.
Coming back to your original hit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I actually did reread the autobiography of Malcolm X and had a very different take on things as one of the books that I read. But I also read the works of the philosophers of the Enlightenment era. Yeah, a lot of Enlightenment philosophy that pushed back against the rigidity and authoritarianism of the Christian West.
You started to challenge your perceived concept and ideas. Is this real or is this just all virtual? What the hell am I doing?
I took myself away from an identity that belonged to the group, and Younus Abdullah Muhammed, who had become Al-Qaeda. Right? I became Jesse Morton again, slowly but surely. Yeah. Jesse Morton got agency back. He left the cult. And it hurt.
It would.
And it hurt. Yeah. I mean, I threw away my life.
It was everything. It was your life. Yeah. They were your people.
It was everything I did, every minute I was awake. I slept 3 hours.
Let me say, my man. Please let me say. They were everything for you, my man. They were everything. They were your name. They were your status. They were your honor. They were everything for you.
I had nothing without them. And then and once that belief that I was upon the truth became a lie too, I realized how much of a failure I actually was in my life. That every decision that I had made, and I also had to be haunted by the awareness that my mother was happy that I ended up proving her correct, you know? So all of that in that cell, all by myself, all of that time, for almost a year of my life, 23 hours in a cell, except when the guard would take me out to take me to the law library. I would come back after reading and I would feel like I was released and relieved. And then I'd go back in the cell and I would only have Quran and Hadith. But because I was reading and thinking for myself, I start to read a different Quran.
Naam.
I started to read a different Hadith.
Aywa.
I started to read a different interpretation because I don't have to now believe, as I was told in the beginning, that students whose teachers are their books make mistakes. And a student who teaches himself is a person upon misguidance. You have to sit at the feet of the sheikh and take the knowledge from him, like the hadith of Jibreel. You know the way, you know, you understand. 100%. And now Islam becomes something that it's not a religion, it's not rules, it's a spiritual essence, and I can define it for myself because my relationship with God is for me.
When my brother Ivan met Manwa Ali,
exactly.
that is exactly what he came across as well. Ivan, my man, isn't that true?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. I found somebody that. I don't know, he just treated me as a human being and let me have my say. Do you know what I mean? I think that's important. He was able to, I don't know, I think it was maybe something to do. He sees something in me from his past, and that enabled him just to let me be me with him. Do you know what I mean?
And he showed you the truth.
Voice come in.
It's not only an ideology, but it is much greater than that. Right, guys? I want to take a deep breath, a really deep breath, Jesse. And I want you to start talking to us about how the rebuilding took place,
so,
where the change came, the stuff that... Go for it.
Can I ask something? Jesse, right? Are you free next Friday?
Sure. Well, let me check. I'll make myself if I'm not.
I'll just check because I think...
Maybe you have part two.
Really good. There's a lot to kick in. Yeah, I think maybe next week.
At this time,
I'm the rebuilding and then the counter narratives, the magazines, and everything.
Sure.
Yeah, I think today has been so valuable to us. Yeah. There's so much for us. There's so much for us. I think a part two would just enhance that conversation because I know you could talk for ages about the counter narratives.
Man, I talk a lot. Yeah.
But I think we'll get that bit in today. I know, but I think if we do it in two parts, I think we'll get the benefit of that longer conversation again.
I think you're right, Ivan, and I would second that.
What I don't want to do is I don't want to cram everything in and we miss that message or that valuable bit that we need to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you rush anything, after you've done it, you think, I should have said that. So I think do a part 2, definitely, I think.
I mean, it's like the former extremist book when the former writes his book right after he left the movement. Like Dylan Roof read a former's book, and Dylan Roof reads it and he says, it was great until the final 2 chapters. What made you apostate? It's like, so we don't want to do a 10-minute segment on the reform and the positive work we're doing now with an hour-and-a-half long segment of all the problems that we created in the past.
So you're right. I agree with both of you. I agree with both of you. I've just put up, hopefully when people will watch this particular and listen to this particular podcast, lightuponlight.online is Jesse's online presence. There's a lot of material and a lot of stuff on there. I think we do need we need you again, my man. And I think you're a gold mine in every sense of that word. All right, with much knowledge to be given, personal experience, and of course impacting other human beings as well. Jesse, if there's any other final thoughts on today's session, please share that with us and we will be very grateful, and of course our listeners hopefully will be as well. Go for it, my man.
We'll mostly keep it there. I just want to thank you guys for having me on, because I think it's the grassroots initiatives that host people that truly understand how this thing really works, because a lot of people don't take countering violent extremism seriously because of the marred face that it gets as mostly an industry. And one thing I would always be open to is any discourse and dialogue that includes Ivan. And I'm very happy to have met you, Imran, so that we can continue to do this work, because even if as a consequence of these conversations, only one person is reached, and that person ends up reaching out and departing, then that's really what this is all is about. So I just want to end by saying that if there is anybody that listens to this now or down the road, that would like honest, confidential conversation about how they might learn from the mistakes that people like Ivan and myself have made, they can contact us at lightuponlight.online or you guys on social media and your contact information, because we do know how to help in a way that is truly sincere. And it is our honor to do so. So I think we should end with that.
We should do. That's powerful. Jesse, my man, Ivan, my man, God bless you, both of you, man. And guys, look after yourself, take care of yourself. Till next time. And now we know it is going to be with Jesse. Take care, guys. See you next week. Creating the Conversation podcast.